The sirens wailed through the dimly lit streets of Seattle, bouncing off the rain-soaked buildings as EMTs rushed an unconscious man into the hospital. His name was Samuel Carter, a construction worker found convulsing outside a downtown bar. His skin was clammy, his veins dark, and his breath came in ragged gasps. Dr. Emily Rhodes, the attending physician, had seen flu outbreaks before, but this was different. The man's pupils were blown wide, his body jerking unnaturally. She barely had time to jot down his symptoms before his body stiffened, and then, in a violent surge, he lunged at the nearest nurse. The attack was so sudden, so animalistic, that it took security several minutes to pull him off. Blood pooled on the floor where his teeth had torn into the nurse's shoulder. But what sent a chill down Emily's spine was Samuel's expression. His eyes were vacant, yet he moved with terrifying purpose. As he was restrained, his breathing turned erratic, and suddenly, his body went still. Flatline. The team scrambled, trying to revive him, but within minutes, Samuel Carter was declared dead. Emily exhaled sharply, gripping the counter for support. Another patient lost. Another routine tragedy in a hospital that saw them too often. But when she glanced at the nurse, now pale and sweating profusely, she knew something was deeply wrong. Across the city, similar cases were popping up. In an apartment complex, a woman was found gnawing at her own fingers, blood trickling from her lips. In a subway station, a man collapsed, seizing violently, only to rise moments later and attack a bystander. At first, authorities dismissed them as unrelated incidents, overdose victims, psychotic breaks, a bad strain of drugs. But by morning, the hospital was overflowing. Patients arrived with fever, nausea, and strange black veins creeping beneath their skin. Many slipped into seizures before dying suddenly, only to wake again moments later, feral and insatiable. Emily, now on her third straight shift, scrubbed a shaking hand down her face as reports flooded in from other hospitals. Same symptoms. Same bizarre aggression. Same terrifying reanimation. A pandemic? A bioterror attack? No one knew. Then the first hospital lockdown was ordered. Police stormed the ER in full riot gear, shoving gurneys aside as they attempted to contain the growing chaos. Officers shouted orders, but the infected had no regard for commands. They lunged, snapping at anything within reach. Gunshots rang out, echoing through the halls. Screams followed. Emily's heart pounded as she pressed her back against a supply cabinet, watching in horror as one of her colleagues, Dr. Patel, was tackled by a reanimated patient. The infected man tore into Patel's neck, blood spraying across the sterile white walls. That's when she knew. This wasn't a disease they could treat. It was something far worse. Somewhere deep inside her, she felt it, a shift in the world, an irreversible tipping point. The end had begun. The emergency broadcast blared through every television, radio, and phone in the city. This is a public health emergency. Residents are advised to remain indoors. All travel is restricted. National Guard forces are being deployed. Do not attempt to leave the city. But Emily knew the truth, there was no containing this. The infected weren't just sick, they were something else entirely. Something unstoppable. Through the hospital's reinforced glass doors, she watched as Seattle collapsed into chaos. Sirens screamed. Helicopters thundered overhead, their searchlights sweeping through the streets. Cars jammed every intersection, their horns blaring uselessly. Pedestrians ran in all directions, pursued by figures that moved unnaturally fast, their bodies twitching as if their own muscles were rebelling against them. Then, the first explosion rocked the city. A gas station on Fifth Avenue erupted into a fireball, sending a shockwave that rattled the hospital's windows. The infected didn't flinch. They surged forward, unfazed by the flames, drawn only to the scent of the living. Emily pulled back from the doors, gripping her stethoscope like a lifeline. The hospital was no longer safe. It was only a matter of time before the infected got inside. She turned to the remaining staff huddled in the hallway. Nurses, doctors, even a few surviving police officers, all of them wide-eyed and terrified. "We need to get out of here," she said, forcing down the panic rising in her throat. "Now." A young paramedic, James, shook his head. "The military's locking the city down. Where the hell do we go?" Emily didn't have an answer. But staying here wasn't an option. A deep, guttural growl echoed down the hall. Every head snapped toward the source, toward the double doors leading to the ER. They were locked, barricaded with gurneys and overturned desks, but the door handles rattled violently. Something was on the other side. Then came the pounding. A heavy, relentless hammering that sent splinters flying from the doorframe. It wasn't just one infected. There were dozens. The barricade wouldn't hold. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears as she grabbed the nearest fire axe from the wall. "We move now." Through the back. The others hesitated only a moment before following. The hospital had a loading dock. If they could reach an ambulance, they might have a chance. They ran. Through darkened hallways lined with flickering emergency lights. Past abandoned wheelchairs and overturned floor stands. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and something worse, the rancid, decaying stench of whatever these people had become. James reached the loading dock first, shoving open the heavy metal doors. "We're clear." But the moment they stepped outside, hope withered in Emily's chest. The city was gone. Fires raged unchecked, casting an eerie glow against the night sky. The streets were filled with bodies, some dead, some still moving, all consumed by the infection. The National Guard had set up barricades, but they were overrun, soldiers firing wildly before being dragged down beneath a swarm of teeth and claws. James sprinted to the nearest ambulance, yanking open the driver's door. "Keys are inside." Before Emily could respond, a shriek cut through the air. A figure launched itself from the shadows, one of the infected, its face contorted in a grotesque snarl. It slammed into James, dragging him to the pavement. Gunfire erupted as one of the officers fired, hitting the creature square in the chest. It barely staggered. Emily didn't think, she acted. She swung the fire axe with everything she had, the blade embedding deep into the infected skull. It collapsed instantly. James scrambled to his feet, gasping for breath. Jesus Christ! But there was no time to react. The noise had drawn more of them. From every alley, from every burning building, they came. Dozens. Hundreds. Emily gritted her teeth and threw herself into the ambulance. "Drive!" The engine roared to life. As they tore through the crumbling city, dodging wreckage and swarms of the undead, Emily knew one thing for certain. Seattle was lost. And if they didn't find a way out soon, so were they. The ambulance hurtled down the ruined streets of Seattle, weaving through wreckage and abandoned vehicles. Fires burned unchecked, casting twisted shadows of the infected roaming the city. The wails of the dying and the guttural growls of the undead mixed into a horrific symphony. Emily clutched the dashboard as James swerved violently to avoid a toppled streetlight. "Where the hell are we even going?" he yelled. "The evacuation zone," Emily answered. T-Mobile Park. The government ordered people there when the outbreak started. One of the police officers, a grizzled man named Reynolds, reloaded his pistol with shaking hands. "If it hasn't already been overrun." No one responded. They all knew the truth, nothing was safe anymore. The radio crackled to life, startling them. A garbled voice struggled through the static. "Military forces, repeat, do not, evac zone, compromised." Then, a final chilling message. "There is no evacuation." James slammed on the brakes, sending the ambulance skidding. It came to a halt in the middle of an overpass. Below them, the remains of the evacuation zone sprawled out, a massive parking lot, military vehicles flipped over and burning, bodies littering the ground. Floodlights flickered over the horror, civilians and soldiers alike torn apart, many rising again with vacant, hungry eyes. Emily's stomach dropped. They had nowhere to go. A deep, unnatural screech echoed through the night, making every hair on her body stand on end. "What the hell was that?" one of the nurses whispered. Reynolds peered through his rifle scope, scanning the wreckage below. "I don't know, but I don't want to stick around to find out." James cursed under his breath. "We need to move. Now." As if in response, movement rippled through the carnage below. Not the sluggish, erratic movements of the infected they'd seen before, this was something else. Something fast. Then they saw it. A creature, larger than any infected they had encountered. Its body was emaciated, skin stretched tight over unnatural muscle. Its head snapped toward them with jerky precision, glowing eyes locking onto them like a predator marking its prey. Then it moved. It leaped onto an overturned Humvee, crouching for a split second before launching itself into a full sprint, straight for the overpass. Emily's breath caught in her throat. "Drive," she screamed. James floored the gas. The ambulance shot forward, tires screeching as they barreled off the overpass just as the creature reached the railing. It didn't hesitate. It leaped, covering an impossible distance, landing on a nearby rooftop with a sickening crunch. Emily risked a glance out the back window. It was still watching them. And it wasn't alone. In the shadows, more figures lurked, faster, stronger, something worse than the infected they'd seen before. The virus was evolving. And now, it was hunting them. The ambulance's gas gauge hovered near empty as James guided it down a rural road outside Seattle. The city was long behind them, but the horror of what they had seen clung to them like a shadow. Emily sat in the back, patching up Reynolds' arm where a close call with an infected had left a deep scratch. He winced but didn't complain. They all knew worse things were out there now. "We can't keep driving forever," Reynolds muttered. "We need fuel. A safe place to regroup." "There's a military bunker," James said, gripping the wheel. "Near Fort Casey. My brother's stationed there. If it's still secure, we might have a chance." The group exchanged wary glances. A military bunker sounded safe. But nothing felt safe anymore. The road wound through thick forest, the ambulance's headlights casting eerie shadows between the trees. Then, up ahead, a chain-link fence loomed in the darkness. A rusted sign read, "U.S. military property, no trespassing." James pulled up to the entrance, stepping out cautiously. The gate was unlocked. No guards. No signs of life. Reynolds cocked his rifle. "I don't like this." Emily's pulse quickened as she pushed open the heavy door of the bunker. The air inside was stale, the dim emergency lights flickering weakly. The silence was suffocating. They descended a steel staircase into the depths of the facility. The deeper they went, the clearer it became, this place had been abandoned in a hurry. Papers and equipment were scattered across desks, some monitors still flashing warning messages. Then they found the bodies. Soldiers and scientists, their uniforms torn, throats shredded. But unlike the city's victims, these had been executed. Bullet holes in the skull. Precision shots. Someone had made sure they didn't turn. Emily's stomach churned. What the hell happened here? James moved toward a control panel, tapping at a half-functional console. A flickering security feed popped up. One of the cameras showed a lab. Inside was a containment unit, shattered glass, blood smeared across the walls. And on a whiteboard, hastily scrawled in red marker, "Project Revenant, we couldn't stop it." A chill crawled down Emily's spine. Reynolds exhaled sharply. This wasn't an accident. They weren't dealing with a random outbreak. This was planned. Then the lights cut out. A deep, animalistic growl echoed through the halls. Something was still down here. And it wasn't human. Darkness swallowed the bunker. The emergency lights flickered weakly, casting eerie red glows across the metal walls. The growl echoed again, deep and guttural, vibrating through the steel corridors. Emily's breath hitched. She gripped her fire axe tighter, her knuckles white. "We need to move," Reynolds whispered, his rifle raised. James cursed under his breath, fiddling with the console. "There's gotta be a backup generator. If we can get the power." A sudden clatter down the hall sent everyone into a tense silence. Then, the sound of something crawling. Not footsteps. Not the mindless stumbling of the infected. This was different. Faster. Intelligent. Emily motioned for the group to move, stepping cautiously into the corridor. The hallway stretched in two directions, one led deeper into the bunker, the other toward what looked like an armory. Armory, Reynolds whispered. We need guns. The group moved carefully, their footsteps muffled on the metal grates. James reached the door first, his fingers shaking as he yanked it open. Inside, rifles, shotguns, and military-grade weapons lined the walls. Half-eaten bodies of soldiers lay sprawled across the floor, their eyes wide in terror. But there was no time to process it. A shriek tore through the bunker. Something was coming. Emily grabbed a shotgun from the rack, pumping it with a click. Lock and load. James barely had time to grab a rifle before they heard it, a wet, unnatural clicking sound. Like bones grinding together. Then, from the ceiling vent, it dropped. It landed with inhuman grace, a towering, grotesque mutation of an infected. Its skin was stretched thin, veins bulging black beneath. But its face was the worst part, its eyes weren't vacant like the others. They were aware. Calculating. It wasn't just another victim of the virus. It was something created. The bunker's secret project, Project Revenant, was alive. It lunged. Reynolds fired first. Bullets shredded into its flesh, but it barely flinched. With inhuman speed, it snatched him by the throat, lifting him effortlessly. Emily screamed and fired the shotgun. The blast tore into its shoulder, but instead of falling, it turned its piercing, intelligent gaze toward her. It smiled. Then, with a sickening crunch, it snapped Reynolds' neck like a twig. James dragged Emily back. Run! Run! They sprinted down the corridor, the creature in pursuit, moving too fast for something that size. Emily's mind raced. Bullets barely hurt it. It's too strong. Too fast. We're not fighting a virus anymore, we're fighting something worse. Then she saw it, a control panel with a label, Main Blast Doors. An idea formed. A desperate, reckless idea. She grabbed James and shoved him toward the exit. Get the others outside. Now. James hesitated. Emily. Go. He ran. Emily turned back. The creature was almost upon her, its grotesque, twisted grin widening. She slammed the blast door override. With a deafening screech, the massive steel doors began to descend. The creature lunged, just as the doors slammed shut. For a moment, silence. Then a single, eerie knock on the other side of the metal. It wasn't trapped. It was waiting. Emily stumbled back, gasping for breath. The others were outside, staring at her. What the hell was that? James asked, his voice hoarse. Emily looked back at the bunker. Not just a virus. A weapon. Something had created that monster. And somewhere, whoever did it was still watching. Emily's hands were still shaking as she stepped away from the bunker's sealed doors. The thing inside wasn't just another infected. It was something engineered, designed. And now, it was waiting. James grabbed her arm. We have to go. Whatever that thing is, it's not staying in there forever. She nodded, swallowing her fear. The group piled into a military jeep they had found near the bunker entrance. The keys were still in the ignition, whoever had left it behind never got the chance to drive away. The engine roared to life. They sped down the road, leaving the bunker and the nightmare behind. But deep down, Emily knew they weren't safe. Not yet. They drove for miles, heading toward the mountains, where they hoped the infection hadn't reached. The radio crackled with static, civilization had fallen silent. Then, as they rounded a bend, headlights appeared behind them. Is that another survivor? One of the nurses asked. Emily's gut twisted. No. Something wasn't right. The vehicle behind them was military. And it was gaining on them. James cursed. That's not a rescue. Gunfire erupted. Bullets ripped into their Jeep, shattering the rear window. They're trying to kill us. Reynolds' partner, a younger cop named Harris, shouted. Emily's mind raced. They don't want witnesses. We know too much. James yanked the wheel, sending the Jeep off-road, crashing through the trees. The tires skidded over wet earth before they came to a rough stop near a ravine. No time to think. They bailed out just as the pursuing vehicle screeched to a halt. Black-clad soldiers emerged, rifles raised. Emily Duff recovered behind a fallen tree, her breath ragged. Who the hell are they? James gritted his teeth. Whoever created this virus. One of the soldiers stepped forward, a patch on his chest reading St. John Corp. A private company. This wasn't a government failure. This was deliberate. The soldier raised a megaphone. We know you're out there. You have information that cannot be allowed to spread. His voice was eerily calm. Emily exchanged glances with James and the others. They were never meant to escape the bunker. They were never meant to survive. A moment of silence. Then, a low growl. Not from them. From the trees. The soldiers turned, just as something massive lunged from the darkness. The Revenant. It had escaped the bunker. And it had followed them. Screams erupted as it tore through the soldiers, ripping them apart with terrifying speed. Their bullets barely slowed it down. Emily didn't hesitate. Run. She and the others sprinted toward the ravine. Behind them, the creature butchered the men who had hunted them. The world had already ended, but this was only the beginning. The virus was never meant to be stopped. It was meant to evolve. And now, nothing could stop it. The end.